A nurse came out of the operating room. Sake and Mitsuha, a young couple who were sitting on a bench, ran over with anxious looks on their faces. When they met, Mitsuha spoke. What about our child? Their beloved child, Takeo, who was 1 year old, suddenly had a seizure and collapsed in the sandbox at the park during the day, and was taken to this university hospital by ambulance. Operation began immediately, but it seemed to be difficult, and the lights in the operating room were still on even after 6 hours. The nurse immediately replied, "Please wait a little longer. We're still in the middle of the procedure." Clang-clang, the sound of geta comes from somewhere. In the operating room, 2 doctors and 2 nurses looked at each other. One of the doctors, Chief of Medical Department Yamazaki, sighed. "This is difficult. I've been a doctor for 20 years, but this is the first time I've seen this. How did this bacteria spread throughout the body?" Then a nurse came back from outside and said, "Doctor, we've received an urgent call from Professor Mizuta of the Intensive Care Center. Did you say it was an emergency?" "Yes, the professor said it was about the emergency." "How would the professor know? Please leave it to me." Chief of Medical Department Yamazaki rushed out. 3 hours later, the lights in the operating room went out. The head of the medical department, Yamazaki, wiped away his sweat and said to Mitsuha and Sake, "We've done everything we can. If only the antibiotics we prepared for him would work, and if only the fever would go down. However, such a case only occurs once a year in the whole country, and it was the first time at this university. From now on, his condition remains critical. Tonight will be the turning point." Hearing this, Sake fainted for a moment. Mitsuha hurriedly supported her. Clang-clang. In a hospital room where visitors were not allowed, the young Takeo was lying in bed with an IV drip. Beside the bed was a monitor screen with several numbers in it. Grass moving around dramatically. Apparently tired, Mitsuha was dozing off on the sofa with his hands together, as if in prayer. Sake was sleeping next to him. Clang-clang. Sake was dreaming. "Hey, isn't that your father?" Sake's father, a dashing chef, approached with the clanging sound of his geta wooden clogs. "Hey, you don't look well," Sake said, crying. "But I thought Takeo was my father's reincarnation." Takeo was born 6 months after Sake's father died. Sake's father said nothing, just nodded repeatedly and smiled. Clang-clang. "Dad." Sake woke up from her dream. Mitsuha woke up to the voice. Then a nurse came in. "Excuse me, didn't an elderly person just come in here?" "No," Mitsuha replied, confirming with Sake. The nurse looked puzzled. "I was about to tell him no visitors, but he's not here." "It's Grandpa, the man in those tall wooden clogs. The entrance is still closed. I wonder where he came from." As she said this, the nurse looked at the monitor screen next to the sleeping Takeo. "Oh," Mitsuha and Sake asked, "What's wrong?" The nurse tilted her head. "His fever has gone down. It's normal." The door opened. The head of the medical department, Yamazaki, and the white-haired Professor Mizuta came in. The nurse looked like she was about to cry. "Doctor, that's amazing. His fever has gone down." Yamazaki, "Huh?" Mitsuha and Sake leaned forward to look at Takeo. "Really?" Yamazaki, "The antibiotics seem to have worked." Professor Mizuta nodded and spoke. "I can tell you now that this is an incurable disease that has never been cured in Japan. If the fever hadn't gone down tonight, all the blood vessels in your child's body would have burst. I saw him once 10 years ago when I was in America. It was too late then, but I took a gamble and advised Yamazaki, the head of the medical department, to use the antibiotics we had used back then." Yamazaki, "When I first got the call from the professor, I thought we would take an ambulance to the intensive care center where he was. This is the only university in the prefecture that has these antibiotics, and your child was in a state where we couldn't afford to waste a moment." Mizuta, "I'm so glad. Really. By the way, Mr. Takashida, do you know?" After a moment of silence, Sake said, "It's my maiden name." Mizuta nodded in understanding. "Oh, I see. It was your father. But anyway, why?" "Well, actually, I got a call yesterday afternoon at about 3 o'clock from someone called Takashida. He was desperately pleading with me to help his grandson. When I asked him about the situation, I found out that the doctor in charge was my student, Yamazaki. And that's when the professor called me. Professor Mizuta is a world authority in bacteriology. aware that Professor Mizuta was an authority in bacteriology. Clang-clang. The sound of wooden clogs gradually fades away. 1 month later, Mitsuo and Sake were beaming with smiles as they soothed Takeo, who was drinking milk from the bottle vigorously.